Now check him out.
My man gives real love, and that's why I call him killer. He's not a wham bam, thank you ma'am, he's a thriller. He takes his time and does everything right. Knocks me out with one shot for the rest of the night. He's a real smooth brother, never in a rush. And he gives me goose pimples with every single touch. Spends quality time with.
Hey guys, what's going on? It is Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale. Today, I have on a very popular first-time guest to the channel. It is ChickenBob, aka YouTube channel YouTuber SquackBot. ChickenBob, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty good.
Dude, I have you on today. I'm excited about the video. A lot of people have requested that you come on the channel, so here I am. I have you. I'm pretty pumped, and we're talking about, of all things, one of the most unpopular subjects in the game. It's Royal Giant. So, man, so before we get to RG, before everybody gets raged in and thumbs down and exits the video, tell us a little bit about yourself. You are a first-time pro on the channel. You're a really good and well-respected player in the entire community. Tell us a little bit about how you picked up the game and when you kind of figured out you were a good player.
Well, really, I just won a few tournaments, and I just played a lot of tournaments and friendly battles with my clan. You know, I'm pretty decent. I would say that. And then
you're being humble.
You know, I helped my gemming addiction, played some grand challenges, got a bit better, and here I am, I guess.
Nice. And would you say that one of your keys to getting better was playing those challenges, just repetition?
Yeah, definitely. But not only that, but it's observing the best players play, looking at, say, like Twitch, YouTube, all of these good replays, and playing with these players over and again, looking at your matchups and observing what you need to improve.
Okay, was there one particular player that you always watched in the beginning when you were trying to get good that you kind of related to? Definitely
CMC Huger, Pompeo, like top-notch players that...
Yeah, top tier, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely really two of the best in the game, C. McHugh and Pompeo. So do you, for other people out there, do you recommending like finding a pro who plays in a style or plays a type of deck that you typically enjoy and then trying to replicate them? Or do you just look for the best player you could possibly find?
It's not really about the players, because players themselves, they constantly make mistakes. Even the best players, like, they will lose in like best of ones and so on. It's really learning getting the feel of the game in every single deck archetype or game mechanics. You really need to get it down good for every single little niche that you need to learn for the game.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the actual subject of today's video. It's going to be how to counter, how to fix, and how to play the Royal Giant. So it's going to be a three-pronged attack on the RG here. I have the deck that you're going to be talking about. It's the RG Meta Lightning deck. This deck's all over the place, but you've been having obviously a lot of success with it. In challenges specifically, we're going to talk about kind of the dimensions of strategy that go into RG play at tournament level standards, where he's not over-leveled, okay? But before we get to that, tell us, as just a kind of a disclaimer for folks out there, why RG is so hated and why he's kind of why he's a pariah, especially on ladder right now in the game, and what do you think should be done to fix that as I turn on your first replay?
Oh Lord, the disgusting 13. I don't want to ever see that number again, but really, Royal Giant is not an issue unless you're in that sweet spot from Hog Mountain, Legend Arena, to I would say about like 4,300 trophies at Challenger 2, where most players are starting to delve past tournament standard at like level 10 to level 12, where the players themselves might only be like that certain level, but Royal Giant, it will get to max. It's actually really disgusting. And then if you look at it, most of the players there, they do require a decent amount of skill, but because of the Royal Giant's huge amount of hit points and DPS, you really start to see the devotion from tournament standard to max Royal Giant, and where they could just abuse the higher amount of stats, and then it just becomes, you know, it doesn't become very easy to play against when the Royal Giant will always eventually manage to get to your tower.
Yeah, you're not, you know, let's just put this on the table. You're not an RG hater. You're just a hater of the fact that he's a common and the fact that people who who don't want to play any other archetypes can simply spam him on ladder because they can overlevel him, and they have that huge advantage because he's difficult to counter because of his HP and his damage output. Is that pretty much accurate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I feel like places such as like Reddit and the comments, you see a lot of people rub themselves off on how much they hate Royal Giant. But I mean, like, Royal Giant itself doesn't have that much problems. It's when it becomes an overpowered version of self at max level. So I definitely feel that Royal Giant at tournament standard is good, and you could help that through because commons, they're going to be always over leveled because you can request for it. So if you turn it into a rare, Supercell definitely can do this. A lot of people have been disappointed at this fact that maybe it'll cause problems to Royal Giant players and so on, but they could use like a conversion rate for rares to commons and so forth and change it so that Royal Giant becomes a rare, and then that could solve a lot of problems that Royal Giant has on ladder.
Yeah, just, the official stance right now from Clash Royale is they don't mind Royal Giant. I'm going to go ahead and flash their response. It's a few weeks old now, but I'm going to flash this response that they had to a user on the forums about RG. But they said his usage rates are actually pretty low compared to other cards, and that really is a bit deceptive because in that range, I'm sure it's skyrocket high that you talked about, But other than that, tournament level standard, you're not seeing a ton of RG in tournaments or in challenges, as you would, or certainly not any more than a Hog Rider or anything like that, any other win conditions. And when you talk about turning him into a rare, I think it's a smart move because think of how hated, say, Graveyard or Hog Rider or whatever, any other win condition would be on ladder if everybody had him maxed, like in the same boat as the RG was in. Everybody would absolutely hate it because they'd be like, great, another max Hog Rider, people would be upset about it. So I do think there's something to your argument that, the biggest thing that's hated about RG is the fact that you can overlevel him and just bully people. And it gets frustrating, really frustrating to be on the losing end of just getting RG bullied, spammed at the bridge. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to use him in different ways at tournament level standard, specifically in this deck. So just to kind of get your opinions all, make sure we heard you out in terms of what's wrong with RG. Is it safe to say that you don't think any nerf is deserving for RG? Rather, you think that he should just be turned into a rare?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I think that I think that I'm going to verge a little bit from you. I think he probably needs a little bit of a nerf. I'm not sure what that would be, but I do feel like, even at tournament level standard, personally, I do feel like there's that aspect of him that's a little bit just drop in support. But I guess you can make that argument about any Siege card at the same time. So I guess maybe I'm arguing both points with myself here. I got the little Ash on the shoulder, the RG loving Ash. But I guess, you do make a good point. It's difficult to come up with a valid reason to nerf him other than that he's frustrating at max level. But anyway, let's go on to the deck. First question I'm going to ask you about this deck is Electro Wiz. Is there any substitution? Because not only is this an RG deck, but it's an RG deck with the OP E-Wiz in it. So what can people substitute for E-Wiz if they don't have him unlocked yet?
Well, if you don't have the Electro Wizard, you probably can't play any deck, but you could definitely...
It feels that way. I'm sure some people would agree with you there in the comments.
You can probably definitely put in Archers instead. Musketeer works very well as well, but there's a lot of substitutions for Electro Wizard. Just find a good range troop that's well-rounded.
Air targeting.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's walk us through, before we get into this deck specifically, tell us about tournament standard RG, and start off by saying why you think it involves skill. A little synopsis of RG play. Well,
we've been in the underground for a long time. We've been put there by countless amounts of warriors, and for the first time we're gonna come out. We're gonna speak. In the previous point about Supercell, that was a long time ago, right?
Well, oh, their response about RG?
Yeah.
I want to say it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Oh, they're using Internet Explorer, but definitely Royal Giant at tournament standard. You could definitely see in the challenges. You could hardly ever see Royal Giant being played. Usually in the first few rounds, you're gonna see a bit of Royal Giant, And when it's just a typical Royal Giant ladder deck, you could really start to identify these people. These people usually do not know the game that well and don't understand the Royal Giant's mechanics. However, on the flip side, on the very other flip side, you see a person who plays this exact deck. Most competitive players will immediately give that person an amount of respect because it's actually very hard to get the Royal Giant to connect to a tower. You see there's a lot of good units aside this deck, and it's very hard to make good decisions to allow your Royal Giant to penetrate through a large amount of defenses when Royal Giant does not have the large amount of hit points and damage you need to get through. And that's why you see Lightning inside this deck to allow your Royal Giant to penetrate. And there's a lot of little decisions in this deck that you had to really keep track of and understand a lot of complex game mechanics to allow your Royal Giant to penetrate.
Okay, wow, a lot to talk about here, a lot to kind of to break apart. So first question to you is, as a RG tournament player, what is the best method to counter RG? Like, what do you have the most problems with? And then we'll get into how you get around those.
Definitely Royal Giant struggles against people that outburn it, because Royal Giant, at its essence, it is a siege beatdown type of archetype. In the fact that it's not quite a beatdown as a sense of a golem or a giant, but instead it can be placed on the bridge much like an expo, and it requires a large setup with like things such as Knight, Electro Wizard minions, or Lightning to protect it. And when something can out-damage a Royal Giant, because Royal Giant relies on its chip ability to penetrate and get a few hits at a time, eventually whittle down your enemy tower, things such as Graveyard, things such as minor control, things such as like Golem Lightning that could just like completely overpower Royal Giant, because Royal Giant is not the most threatening beatdown, and things such as like Lava Loon and Golem is very hard to deal with. And really a lot of times Royal Giant play boils down to value lightnings, whether or not you can use a lightning to allow your Royal Giant to get through, whether or not your lightning takes out opponent troops and defenses so that your Royal Giant can hit the tower. And sometimes these lightnings is very hard to come by, and things such as like decks that involve like Electro Wizard, Knight, and so forth, they can place it all in one corner, such as like Tag's deck, which has a lot of meaty, medium-sized troops that aren't as vulnerable to lightning, but can also pack a punch to the Royal Giant. They're going to stack it on the side to avoid lightning, and that becomes a huge issue for Royal Giant.
Okay, so as somebody going against RG, so what should they do as soon as you place him? What would be the best method of defending a Royal Giant? Should you take some damage from the RG and then mount like a very strong counter push? Or what would be the best method to dealing with RG?
It definitely depends on your deck. Say if you're like a control or a siege deck, you never want to take a Royal Giant damage, because you never have that ability to like instantly take down a tower in a way that a beatdown deck does. So if you're gonna play Lava Loon, you definitely have to take a Royal Giant damage if your deck doesn't run a defense or any like hard way to counter Royal Giant, and you instead have this way to basically mount giant counter pushes that completely cripple your opponent.
Yeah.
That's when you start to want to ignore Royal Giant. But Royal Giant, much like a Hog Rider, it is a distraction tool. And when they place it in the back, when the Royal Giant player mimics a beatdown player by placing it in the back, trying to mount this big push with the Royal Giant, maybe even two Royal Giants, you definitely want to split push it, go the opposite lane, treat it normally like a regular beatdown deck.
Okay.
How you play that against.
Okay, that's smart. And I want to ask you about when you're placing the Royal Giant at the bridge versus behind your tower. I know that's really important when it comes to strategy. So, but before we get to that, one final tip on countering RG, especially in that ladder circumstance. So not so much tournament level standards, but for people out there who are frustrated by RG going against max RG, would you recommend they add like a hard RG counter to their deck, no matter what the deck is, if they're in that range you talked about? Or is that something that they should just stick with the deck they're playing and try to work around the RG? Like, should they add Mini P.E.K.K.A? And if so, like, if they do add the Inferno Tower to a deck that otherwise called for, a cannon, do you think what do you think the best counters are to RG?
Well, the best counter is probably tapping her home button and double swiping. But
Well well played.
Strong emotions out there. But the Royal Giant, you should just build a giant pool of DPS if you have nothing, because you're gonna get bodied. You're gonna get absolutely destroyed by the Royal Giant on ladder. It's a scary world out there, and mini P.E.K.K.A, barbarians, minions, you need to add on that extra DPS on any ladder deck. Never compare a tournament deck with a ladder deck, because you have things such as giants, hogs, and Royal Giants out there. Even defenses such as Inferno Tower won't do it. You definitely need to fight over-level commons with over-level commons, and my go-to is definitely Barbs. Barbs is absolutely solid. Little troops such as like minions and like skeletons always do the trick, and never go without a defense on ladder.
Okay, so that's a good advice. So we're rocking. You guys are gonna want to rock a defensive structure, and you're gonna want to rock barbarians or something that is a good high DPS counter that can take out RG quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
Simple enough. And one other question I had on defending RG before we hop in, I've been saying that the first 15 minutes of the video, but one other question I had on defending and countering RG is, as an RG player, as a user of RG, if you're coming at me with a Royal Giant and you have archers or minions backing up the RG and I have Fireball, I typically normally just Fireball on the RG and the minions or the archers. Is that a good move on my part, or is it a bad move?
That's a really good move, because most of the time Royal Giant, it doesn't lack threat at all. It's very one-dimensional in the fact that the card itself, all it does is an hit pool. It's just a mass amount of hit points, and it does damage to your tower. It just slowly hits. The only minions and archers, that immediately increases the threat level and turns into a dynamic push. And by eliminating these backline factors, you turn Royal Giant back into that one-dimensional card that it is, and it's very easy to deal with a lone Royal Giant.
Okay, so even if I see the opponent drop archers way in the back and I know the RG's coming later on, you would recommend using a Fireball on those archers when they're passing the tower?
Yeah, because if you think about it, Royal Giant is a 6 elixir investment. If you just drop at the bridge consistently, you may get some damage in, but you're losing out on 6 elixir consistently. Meanwhile, if you have these backline troops, they're going to constantly chip away at your troops that are defending the Royal Giant. And those are what is going to generate you value, not the Royal Giant itself.
Okay, great. So tell us about this deck specifically. How are you playing it? And there's no better place to start in the deck than the Royal Giant. When are you typically busting him out in a match? And when are you playing him behind the King Tower versus at the bridge?
So this is the point where usually ladder players and tournament players deviate in Royal Giant. You never just want to drop out Royal Giant willy-nilly. On ladder, you definitely see like people just drop Royal Giant immediately as they get in their hand. Like I said back, Royal Giant, you have to deviate when to use it as a beatdown S card or as a siege S card. So against control players, such as like minor control, minor poison, things such as like Hog Rider, you definitely want to drop Royal Giant up in the front every single time to amount the pressure. And however, the thing is, like, Royal Giant as a beatdown type of card, usually you want to be able to overwhelm your opponent. So if you know they could defend your Royal Giant every single time with like an Inferno Tower or like say their Spellbait, which is very prominent inside this meta, you want to be able to drop your Royal Giant in the back. Oh wait, let me change my opinion now. Drop your Royal Giant in the back for any control. That's what I meant. Strong emotions. But
of course. You're passionate. We love it, man.
Definitely. You'd want to drop your Royal Giant in the back against these types of troops to mount this push. Like the first wave of Royal Giant, the Royal Giant's gonna get countered. That's not a problem, no problemo. The second time is when you clear all of the counter cards for a Royal Giant, and the second time is usually when you expect to penetrate. You're gonna cycle back to another Royal Giant. And this is the time where you drop at the bridge to overwhelm your opponent with this huge counter push ability with the Royal Giant. And when Golem players against like these other beatdown players against Golem and Lava Balloon, you want to use Royal Giant similar to a Hog or like an Expo, a more Siege type card where you're going to instantly drop it on the opposite lane to apply pressure, and maybe put like one tiny like support chip such as Minions or Electro Wizard to make sure your Royal Giant garners a bit more value to distract your opponent and make their resources more thin.
Exactly. Make them have to, you know, have to counter it with at least 3 elixir, hopefully more, much more.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I actually, that makes a lot of sense here. So your first push generally is going to be an RG behind your tower. It's going to take him so long to actually walk up. If you can cycle almost all the way back to RG again after they're done defending against the first one, that's where you're going to get your damage in. Is that correct?
Yeah, never drop your Royal Giant at the river randomly. You have to identify their counters to Royal Giant, and and then you're gonna use your troops to counter their counters. And if they have anything that could counter your counters that counter their counter, you have to identify that as well. So there's a very chess like mechanic to playing Royal Giant inside this deck.
I think I understand that. You have to counter the counter of the counter after the counter hits the counter.
Yeah, lots of counters. Can probably go to IKEA, buy all those counters.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, on sale. So level 13 counter coming right up. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about RG. Now talk about when you're not going to be playing him in the back. I would assume against most other Expo or Siege archetype decks, Expo or Mortar. How do you deal with those matchups?
So Siege archetypes, they're relatively easy. I mean, like, you just drop it on top. Every time they drop a Mortar in Expo, you drop on top. And then you try to garner any extra value out after that when you're done with it by mounting a counter push. Against decks that, such as Hog Rider and so on, like decks that don't have that control-y element to them where they completely turtle up, where they don't have like the necessary means to defend your Royal Giant, such as decks with like Furnace and so forth, you definitely don't want to drop your Royal Giant in the back. That just allows them time to punish you with Hog Riders, with Graveyards, and so on. You want to be able to punish at the river because you know they don't have anything for a Royal Giant. Every time you drop your Royal Giant at the river, it's going to garner some damage in, and even then you should be able to calculate where your opponent has and like say lightning it. Like if they only have Electro Wizard and Mega Minion cycle, you're going to have to wait for Lightning and put that in your cycle to allow you to penetrate that defense.
Okay, so offensive philosophy of this deck is first things first, you assess what your opponent's playing, you assess what their counter is, and then in the first 2 minutes, what are you generally doing? We talked about how to play the RG, but like what would be your ideal starting move, and how are you kind of setting the table to what will ultimately be, you know, your lethal punishing pushes?
So you see Furnace inside this deck, another very solid type of card. Furnace controls a tempo within the game constantly, and if a lot of times you won't drop Royal Giant. Royal Giant, you're almost never gonna drop it in the first 2 minutes because you're gonna feel out your opponent. And like I said, Royal Giant is all about identifying their counters and managing to find a way to play around it with all of your very solid support cards such as like Lightning, Electro Wizard, Knight, and so forth. So Furnace is what you're gonna do and concentrate on protecting when you're in the first 2 minutes when you're feeling out your opponent and trying to control the tempo and build your cycle in a way that lets you gain the advantage in late game. So a lot of times if they have like things such as like Lightning and Poison, you want to be able to drop your Furnace on the other side so that even if your Royal Giant managed to get like 400 damage like in the beginning, you want to be able to split push and make sure that your Furnaces constantly apply pressure. And another tip is you definitely don't want to cycle with like heavier things such as like Knight and Electro Wizard. Furnace, Skeletons, Minions are your go-to, and then defend accordingly with Knight and Electro Wizard. Just feel them out, try to defend as well as possible, and in late game you go for the hard bridge skirmishes with your Royal Giant.
Okay, great. So early game, you're feeling out your opponent, you're playing defense, you're using the RG if the opportunity presents itself, but otherwise you're not forcing the issue by any stretch. When is normally your first, let's say you have nothing to play. Let's say, you have a 2 elixir advantage and you just defended. and you have RG in hand, and it's only 1 minute into the match, are you still using RG in that circumstance?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, it doesn't mean you never play Royal Giant. Play Royal Giant when the
situation calls for it, kind of.
Yeah, when you can punish.
Okay. All right. Well, any final words? I'm running out of replays here to show, but I think I have a good awareness of the deck. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that when you're going super aggressive in the end of a match in the end game? Is your, I mean, I imagine your ideal push would just be RG Lightning mixed with whatever you have to. Is that pretty much the case?
Yeah. A lot of times a hard part in using Royal Giant offensively is identifying whether or not to use Lightning or to use your support cards such as Knight and Electro Wizard. And really, it depends on how they could defend those cards. If you know they have the ways to defend your like Electro Wizard or Knight, they have Inferno Tower. Your Knight and Electro Wizard won't do anything against that. They have like a Goblin Gang and like Skarmy. You're gonna try to outplay that with your other spells, and you really need to identify what works best at the right opportunity. Lightning works best when you know they only have like things such as like a Furnace and Electro Wizard Cycle. If they have like a baby dragon or something that sits right on top of the Royal Giant, you're gonna garner value more by dropping an Electro Wizard at the bridge and taking out while the Royal Giant constantly chips at the tower. And one last tip is, if they're running any spawner or like an Inferno Tower or a cannon or anything, and if they try to like control the tempo by dropping in the middle, I believe it's 3 tiles away from the river. I need an orange juice check on this, but if you drop a Royal Giant at the river, it should be able to chip out the opponent, and this is actually pretty crucial considering how many people play Furnace in the meta now.
Yeah, for sure. Furnace seems to be everywhere. So. Dude, all incredibly valuable advice. I think that we've discussed, we've you know, hopefully accomplished our mission here. We've talked about how to fix, how to counter, and how to win with Royal Giant. So, dude, ChickenBob, it's been a pleasure having you on, man. I need to have you back talking about a non-polarizing win condition next time. But this has, again, been valuable information. I just wanted to thank you again for coming on. And you are a YouTuber. Can you tell people where to find you? I'll include, of course, the links as well.
Yeah, I upload pretty much once every week, and I try to upload things that are like educational and like help you learn something, and like try to keep it entertaining a bit. So yeah, I upload on YouTube and I have a Twitter. I guess that's pretty much it.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. Again, all those links will be in the description below for you guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you didn't rage too hard through it, but you've gotten to the end, so congratulations for that. Huge YouTube shout out to my YouTube sponsor, Bren Chong. You can find his information in the description below as well. Thanks again to my guest, and thanks again to you guys for watching. Really appreciate it, and as always, take care, guys.